at this point, I'm going to pass things over to OPWSA former co-chair and current board member, Cathy Mallove, and she is also the chair and lead of our residential options working group that OPWSA has. So I will hand things over to Cathy.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see many familiar faces here and some new faces as well, and to have a conversation with everybody today about housing. I know as a parent, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, it's really top of mind for me. I would say 24/7, often at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's great to know that I'm not alone, and that there are lots of other people that are thinking along the same lines. I'm just going to quickly kind of set a little bit of context. We did a survey earlier this year to get a sense of what's going on and what people are thinking and what people are aware of. Because one of the key things that we want to do at OPWSA, and also as individual families, is to kind of figure out how we can work together and how we can support one another in this journey. And what we heard in the community survey is, there's a whole bunch of people who kind of are thinking, I need to do something, but I don't know where to start. And then a bunch of people that have started planning, but are like, now what? As we get down, smaller and smaller number of people who actually have a plan, or people that are actually have somebody placed in a group home or waiting for a response. So I think a lot of us are in the same boat. So if you're feeling lost and scared, you're not alone, and we can do a lot more together than we can by ourselves. One of the other things, and that's part of the reason for this webinar today, is there are a lot of resources out there. I know as a parent, I swim around and find them, sometimes find them helpful, often find them overwhelming. But there's a lot out there, and there are a lot of good planning tools out there. There are a lot of people doing stuff, and there are a lot of ways to connect. So one of the things that we thought might be nice for us to all share is what's helpful and what we've learned, and how we can collectively build on that together. The main challenges that we're hearing, and I know we'll talk more about challenges today, and I'm hoping about opportunities as well, is who do we work with? Like, where do I go to find a housing solution, and who would I talk to, and where's the money going to come from, and what does the housing actually look like, and how am I going to make sure that I find good people to help support my family member. And I'm glad to see a little less so about finding like-minded families, because that's what this is all about for us right now today, is like-minded families and resources. And many people talked about just wanting to have more access to workshops, to information, figuring out what's happening in our local communities, and connecting with others. So just wanted to set the context to say, I'm really glad everybody's here, and we have a great couple of people on the panel to help us along the way. I'm going to let Patricia and Kelly introduce themselves, but Patricia is another parent who's been down this journey for quite a long time, and Kelly is a fabulous facilitator who a group of families, 8 families with kids with Prader-Willi, got together independently earlier this spring, and we got together and we hired Kelly and her partner Catherine Pickard, who's from York Support Services and the Housing Navigator in York Region, and they ran a fabulous workshop in which we had 4 sessions as a group of 8 families, learning about housing and all the different aspects that for us to consider. And then in between, Kelly helped all the families, and we benefited greatly from that, with an individual person-directed plan for our daughter, Rebecca. And so that's been really helpful. And Kelly has also been working with the association on compiling the information from the workshop, from the community survey, and from her extensive experience to, oh, here's Rebecca, to help inform this. So Rebecca, I'm about to talk about you.
I know, but I'll let you and Kelly do that.
Okay, so this is Rebecca in person, and
I want to go pee.
Okay, she's going to go pee. Just thought we'd share. And so Rebecca is 26 years old, and she has been, I have to say, during COVID in the last 18 months, an absolute source of fun and joy in our home. We've had a lot of stress in terms of shifting in terms of many things, but I would say that in the last 18 months for us too, it's been a real opportunity to kind of get to know Rebecca as an adult and as a community member in our community, as opposed to kind of going out and around in programs all the time. And we've been having a lot of fun. So she loves her dog, Ziggy. She has a lot of friends. You'll see a group picture in the lower corner, and that is the network of support that we've started. I don't know how many of you have started to establish circles of care or networks of support. We were paralyzed at the idea of asking for help and asking for connection from our friends and community. And one of the things that we learned personally in this workshop with Kelly is that when you ask, people really want to be there and they want to help. And we have a really great and vibrant group of people from all aspects of Rebecca's life who have come together to support her and to support us and Rebecca's sister Natalie in this journey. Yes, and there are people that Rebecca chose.
By myself.
By yourself, that's right. So
with no one's help.
With no one's help. Okay, so I am now going to go on mute and let Patricia talk about herself a little bit and her story. The one thing I want to say about Rebecca is she lives at home. She is 26, and we are in the process of developing a plan and looking at options for her to live, Ziggy to live independently. And we're hoping within the next 5 years.
In the next 5 or 6 years, Mom.
Yes.
You could just say that. Be quiet.
Patricia, you're on mute.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can.
Okay.
You're all good.
Okay. Hi, everybody. You know what? It's great to be connected, even in this sort of remote way, with the Prader-Willi community. It's been a long time, and I've been missing the connection. I want to start out just by echoing what was just said in terms of being terrified to ask for help. And I can really identify with that. Victoria, my daughter Victoria, is 49. Was a single parent most of her life, and she's an only child. And for a great deal of her life, I thought two things. One was that I had to do everything myself. And secondly, that if I didn't do it myself, other people wouldn't do it right. And so it's been a journey, and it's an ongoing journey with that. Victoria's 49. She has been living independently with support in the community for almost 25 years, which is quite astounding to us. She has family support and worker support. In many ways, our family has been a pioneer. Because of Victoria's age, we were approaching some of these things that we all think about and worry about at a very early stage. And I always had a wish for Victoria that she would grow up and move away from home in whatever way she could do that was appropriate for her well-being and her safety and her happiness. She told me at a very early age, "Mommy, I don't want to live in a group home." And we date back to the days when that was the model, certainly the model in the US and pretty much the model here. She was really clear about that, and I was clear about that for her and with her. When she was about 25, I moved her out of our home, really without any support other than me, and she was in a rental apartment. And pros and cons for that, I overestimated some of her capabilities and didn't have enough support in place, and it took some corrections to make that work better. She always wanted to be on her own. I started out by purchasing some minor support from people in the community and filling in the gaps. Again, we're sort of on the forefront of things because in the late 90s, the Ontario government started to think differently about funding for people with special needs. And the model had always been that the funding for help for people with developmental disabilities went to agencies and was managed by agencies. We were very fortunate to get into a pilot project in '98, which was probably the government's first sort of try at individualized funding. So we were able to obtain funding that came directly to Victoria, and we were able then to direct how that funding was going to be spent. So we have spent the bulk of it hiring and training support workers for Victoria. We're very fortunate. We have enough money from the ministry to provide for her 5 hours a day of personal support worker support. And with that support and with safeguards in place in her home, like food security, she's able to live on her own. I know that each of our sons and daughters are different. They have different challenges, different strengths. Victoria's never been one particularly to forage for food. So with a locked fridge and a day fridge and security and assurance that her food that is for her would be available for her, she has done very well. So she initially lived in a rental apartment, and after about 10 years, we wanted to do something different. So we purchased a small condo for her in Toronto. And I just like to add that it's not because I'm wealthy. I took a mortgage on my condo to do it. She was there for about 10 years, very happily. And we have just moved on to the next phase of our plan because I'm 77, almost 78 years old, and we have no family in Toronto, no family very close at all. And it's always been my dream to be able to have security and safety and love for her when I'm no longer calling the shots. She's recently moved to Barrie. She's being supported by people that we've known for a long time who are her generation, who have very lovingly offered to kind of gradually take over and be there for her in a way that I've always been there. So she lives on her own in an apartment. You can see her there in the picture out in the balcony. She has 5 hours of support a day from a worker who is one of the two of this family. And with that, she lives very, very well. So, you know, my big challenge over the past few years has been looking at my own mortality, which none of us certainly like to think about, and we certainly don't like to talk about it. But this is sort of the next phase, and maybe almost the final phase in my plan for her in terms of her independent, safe, happy life in a community of her choosing. She loves her apartment. She loves her community. She loves what's around her and the people and the families that she's connected with. And it's a good story for us. I know that there are some things that are dissimilar, including the fact that we were fortunate enough to get in the bottom line in terms of money. But Victoria is having a happy life. She has always wanted to live on her own, not with a roommate. And her roommate is sitting on her lap there. That's Louie. That's Midnight Louie, who's her constant companion. And I think what I hear is Rebecca's got a constant companion too. And I think that's really important for our guys. So I'll turn it back over now and just join and listen in. Thank you.
Great. Well, I know we've always benefited from, you know, hearing from other families and
Mom,
particular Patricia.
I always wanted to
things
live
like
with Ziggy.
And,
I always wanted to live with Ziggy.
and your experience, you know, I know we've learned a lot. And one of the things I think, you know, that we can see from your experiences, you know, you talk about being unique and unusual in how you structured it and how things were funded. And I think that's really reflective of many of the shifts and many of the changes that are going on. And I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to introduce herself and talk about it. But I know some of the questions that were submitted today were about, you know, how to get a placement in a group home. What about the DSO waiting list? You know, how do I access services? And I think Kelly can give us some insights on what is really a significantly changing landscape in Ontario and in many places. So over to you, Kelly. You're on mute.
Thank you so much. It's so inspiring to see families planning early, and it's, I think.
Oh, Kelly,
Sorry.
you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted myself, but then I muted myself. So very happy to be here and speak to families. I love hearing the stories from families and the journey. It is a journey, as Patricia talks about and as Cathy talks about. Things change, lives change. People change, we meet new people, we have new experiences, and so we have to be adapt and flexible with everything. one of the things that I want to talk about is that we are actually moving to hopefully a new enlightened approach through multiple ministries, not only MCCSS. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the different funding sources, but I will talk about a lot of those today. And I will refer to a couple of ideas and models, and specifically I will refer to how there are unique challenges with people who have PWS. So how we have to plan differently, knowing the different needs of people that we're planning with. So why don't we start with what many of you probably have heard about. It's called the Journey to Belonging. And this is what I consider hopeful and optimistic for where we're going. The Ministry of Community, Children, Community and Social Services have just updated and refreshed the transformation agenda. And they've now revamped and remarketed the agenda, much like Facebook, to something new called the Journey to Belonging. But what this basically means is that they are recommitting themselves to allowing people like, Becky, to decide and make choices in terms of how they want to live, who they want to be supported by, and what their day might look like. And so if you read the Journey to Belonging, it talks a lot about choice and inclusion, which is, I think, what many families have talked about in the past, of being most important to having the best possible life. The biggest thing and the biggest hint to moving towards something that allows families to make more choices is also the change of what we call the SIPPDA Act. So it's the Services and Supports to Promote Social Inclusion of Persons with Developmental Disabilities. And so when the Journey to Belonging was brought forth and highlighted in the community, so was the SIPPDA Act updated. The SIPPDA Act basically is the legislation that allows us to move new ideas into action. And if you would like to, at a later point, I believe that we're going to be able to send the slide deck out to you. If you click on this live link, it will allow you to see how that act has changed and how there is now something called direct funding in it, specifically under Part 4, Section 11. It talks about the concept of direct funding. Now, direct funding is not new for families. It began in 2005 with passports, but under the Act, it's talking about direct funding for supports and services in the community. So it also refers to direct funding for people living in homes of their own and hiring the right supports at the right time. Another hint that things are changing is anybody who's familiar with the Autism Ontario OAP program, so Ontario Autism Program. Ontario Autism Program is a resource that I think all families should be looking into. If you have children between 0 and 18 who have Prader-Willi, some of the individuals can also be diagnosed with, there's a autism diagnosis that sometimes comes out when people have Prader-Willi. And so you might be eligible for the Ontario Autism Program. And that would be direct funding for any children from 0 to 18 from $5,000 a year all the way up to $61,000 a year, depending on the complexity of the child. So another sign of changing times is that the OAP program and SIPPDA are now looking towards direct funding to allow people to have choices. Other pieces of the plan that we look at is housing. Housing is always an issue for people, all people in the province, all people in the country. So when we do plans, we try to leverage what renovation grants and what grants and supports and services might be available through different ministries, including the housing ministries. So a new program that many families might not know about is the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit, which supports direct funding for people to pay their rent. So up to $631 a year to pay your landlord in the place of your choice to help subsidize that rent. So people no longer have to move into subsidized housing places. They could stay in homes that they prefer to be in, including homes of their own. So I've seen somebody in the Durham area, for example, who just received this funding, the COB funding we call it, and who's using it to pay rent in his secondary suite in the family home. So another way that we see the ministry is changing and adapting to allow people more choice and flexibility in their planning. I just want to always mention that families, there is a huge wait list. Cathy mentioned it beforehand. You know, how do you get on the wait list? How do you stay on the wait list? What does a wait list mean? And she has it in, I don't know how it's in English, guillemets in French, but basically it's people refer to it as a wait list. But what I want to mention to people is that Developmental Services Ontario is a list of all people in the province waiting for supports and services. It's basically a management list that allows ministry to know the number of people in each region who have a developmental disability who is waiting for supports and services. They use this list not only to support and prioritize people in need, but they also use it to look at future planning for the ministry. So where should they be investing money in the future? It allows the ministry, MCCSS, to have concrete data to support the requests at the provincial level. So just like the hospital has concrete numbers of people waiting in emergency and the number of people who are overcrowding beds and capacity, now Developmental Services has the same ability to have those numbers, and therefore we're able to advocate as a community for the right amount of funding to be invested in developmental services, in other words, in supports for people with developmental disabilities. The one thing that I tell families all the time is don't count on that. There were, I'm going to give you an example, there were maybe a few people last year who were allocated group home spaces in the Toronto area, and thousands of people were on that list. So even though it's a list, it's not first come, first serve. It is prioritized based on your situation, meaning those who are homeless and whose parents have both deceased are prioritized over people who have been on the list for 20 years. So it is not a date-oriented priority list. Some other kind of things that allude to a changing landscape is the Developmental Services Housing Task Force that in 2016 allocated some funding, some of which I worked with 8 families who developed housing plans with. So it was their first attempt at kind of researching through what we call lived experiences, what might work and what might not work. So that's another hint that things are changing. And also finally, the evolving roles of agencies. Agencies are starting to be interested in dialogue and conversations with families and family groups about how they can support people in the future. So for example, maybe they're starting to have conversations about providing coordinated supports and services versus having a person live in a group home. They're now providing coordinated staffing models to families' current homes. So all of that to tell you there is a big shift from building capacity in group home systems to moving towards individualized models and approaches, and which gives families hopefully the fire to start planning differently and start thinking of what a good life could look like, rather than assuming that the only good life and option is to move their child into a group home placement. So I think we're going to move a little bit into different types of models that people want to and think of considering when they're looking at supporting their loved ones. So I want to talk a little bit about what a group home is and what it means. So if you're looking for a group home that is funded through the transfer payment agencies, through the DSO, these group homes are managed and run by agencies. And so there's pros and cons. The pro is, there's families can, put their hands up and not have to worry about the day-to-day responsibility. The cons are you have much less control in terms of where your child lives, who they live with, who supports them, and the space they live in. So the spaces available through this public system, through the DSO, are spaces that have been developed and are maybe 30, 40, 50 years old. They're in, sometimes there's up to 9 people living in a space, believe it or not. The spaces are set up and look somewhat, to me at least, institutional versus like a home. And so, and the staff who are hired are the staff, and you don't have any stay as a family. So just to be aware that there's, if you're asking for a group home, it's much like long-term care facilities. They are institutional feeling. They don't feel like a home. They're not very inclusive necessarily. And it is a roof over the head and they're well fed, but it's not necessarily what families are striving for or hoping for their kids. And each agency is different. There are better group homes and not such great group homes, just like in everything else in life. But a lot of, there are also private providers in the group home. So families who decide that they want their son or daughter to live in a group environment can also still, purchase a turnkey approach, a group home that's already developed, and they could pay what's called a per diem, a daily rate. But to be truthful, the daily rate can run anywhere from $200 to $1,000 a day to have that space. So it is an expensive proposition to purchase kind of turnkey options where housing and supports are all blended together, and where you're just basically buying a bed and supports. A lot of families are thinking a little bit differently and looking at other models that have been created to support the need for community and the need for having on-demand support. And specifically, there is an agency who's taken a lot of leadership in this area, RENA, who has built a lot of intentional communities and is actually leading something called the Intentional Community Consortium. And this is open to any families to join or parent groups to join. So if you have a group of parents in Ottawa who are interested in this model, but it doesn't exist in that area, you're welcome to join the Intentional Community Consortium. Basically, an intentional community is where you have space and resources all in the same location. So they will rent you an apartment. You could choose if you want to live alone or with others. You get to choose your roommates for the most part, and you could choose how much support you need or how little support you need based on your needs. It's a really great model. And for the PWS families, I would consider having some conversations with intentional communities in your areas and talking about how you might be able to partner with them and basically develop the right setting for your sons and daughters specific to, the food issues. So maybe you'd have to put in some accommodations, have a separate floor, for example, with different kinds of accommodations in place in that floor, because for other individuals, it might be considered a restrictions, a rights restriction. So you'd have to plan very intentionally with those community providers to make sure that it was an intentional community feel, but that the person's food needs were still supported in that setting and safe. Other things that families are looking at is, even developing individual options within their place of choice. So I've seen families who, rent or buy or rent their own space, either a condo or an apartment, and hire their own staff. Sometimes they hire from a third party staffing solutions, like an agency that can provide that in existing community living. It's really great because you have choice, but the con is that, it takes time. Your time as a family, as a caregiver will be managing that, and managing resources takes time. So it's not a turnkey approach. We also have an approach where a lot of families decide to cluster together. I call it the cluster model, where you work with other families, you decide on the community that you want your sons or daughters to live in. You maybe rent or purchase apartments in the same building, and then you hire a specific agency to provide the supports in that setting. And so the benefit there is that the supports actually become much more sustainable, because you could hire a full-time support to support 5 people in that building, and therefore they stick around. It's not just part-time work. And finally, we have a lot of families, I just spoke to 2 of them today, who are looking at aging in place. So for example, renovating their home into co-ownership and co-housing, multi-generational homes, purchasing or building a secondary unit beside their home and taking advantage of some of the regional grants for densifications, etc. For all of these solutions, what I would recommend for families is that you know best what works for your sons or daughters. Everybody's different, even though they all have PWS, they have different needs and different solutions and ways that you've supported them. So when you work with a planner and you're looking towards a housing solution, make sure you keep those things in mind. And we have actually a page, Cathy, the next page, that talks a little bit about how you can do that. So this picture on the left is a template taken from the DSO toolkit. So the DSO toolkit actually has a really great way for people to start right away and free. And it allows you to start visioning what a good life looks like and thinking about what needs to be in the home to accommodate the needs that the person has. So that is something that I would strongly recommend families start with, is looking at resources within that toolkit and starting to think and vision differently. I have down here, down the right-hand column, different areas that I believe are core goals for every person. regardless of where you live. It's important to also think that your home is more than just a home, it's your community. I think at the beginning, Cathy, you mentioned the desire to belong. The quality of life is about the network of support and friendship, along with the meaningful places in the person's community, not only where they live. And so whenever we develop plans, we really suggest that you develop these 6 core goal areas as well, because they all relate back and are interconnected to the person's housing goal. In all of those areas, we actually have part of the work that I did with the 8 families is we developed some recommendations for specific PWS considerations or recommendations for each of these areas. So maybe Jennifer and Cathy, as part of this, maybe we could upload onto the website some of those recommendations for each of the core areas. So for example, you know, a lot of the time I'm a big technology proponent, but for some people that is actually access to food. So we have to look at how we can safeguard or mitigate the risk for technology and what kind of technology can actually be functional for people with PWS versus a tool to access food, et cetera.
The other thing, Kelly, I would just say about that is that, you know, that as we went through this in the workshop, these were the key areas that really helped us understand what kind of support Rebecca needed, and then translating that into the big issue, which is the funding, where, you know, how much it costs to actually do all of these things and do them well.
I agree. And the other piece of it is if you start working on these goals early, and for example, Rebecca, we talked about gaining the skills for living more independently, life skills, and using technology. That also reduces potentially the overall cost to support, because maybe she won't need quite as intensive supports if she works in certain areas. There's baby steps that all families could start working on. A lot of it is called practicing in place. It's where we you know, through trial and error, much like Patricia talked about, right? The trial error piece. So I think that we want to get to questions and answers as quickly as possible, because I know that all of you have things that you're thinking about. So very quickly, my biggest recommendation is, as Cathy kind of wrote at the top, an imperfect plan is better than no plan at all. And working together with others, with parents, with partners, whoever those might be, is much easier to do than alone. So much of my work is learning from my mistakes or family's mistakes and kind of knowing what has worked and what could work better. And so bringing to families the tips and tricks that I've learned from all of you in one area. So practice in place means you're going to start creating a vision and looking at what in a perfect world it would take for your son or daughter to live in their community. Maybe it's about leaving more often, allowing them times to, for example, have time on their own. Overnight camp, great way to get them used to being with others, and it really allows them something concrete, for example, to refer to when you talk about one day living on it more independently or with friends. They could actually envision it because they've done it at camp. The DSO toolkit we've mentioned before. So this link is a live link. When you guys get the slide deck, you can click right into that. There's a lot of workshops out there through Partners for Planning, Connectability, the DSO, all sorts of free workshops to support families in planning. One of the big tools that Cathy mentioned earlier and that I mention often is the steps to independence. If you have younger kids, there's a similar one for 0 to 18 through Blurview that I could actually send your way, Cathy, for the younger ones. Steps to Independence is great for 16 plus, but the Blurview one is absolutely fabulous for younger people. When I plan for young kids 4 and up, 4 to 10, I really like the Blurview one. It tells you what you should be achieving at different ages based on other kids that age. You know, learning how to make a scrambled egg at 10, you could be pushing people to do that also earlier on. And finally, anything you practice, any kind of skill reduces your overall cost in supporting your son or daughter in the future. There are a lot of things under the financial area. I call it optimization or maximization of resources. This is from ODSP to, you know, different kinds of health subsidies. So the family managed home care program, which is direct funding through home and community care, housing subsidies like the COB I mentioned. Even simple things like when you apply for ODSP, make sure you apply for the tenant amount and not the room and board amount, and you'll get $200 more a month. And how that you are a tenant versus a room and board person. What is the strategy?
And the food subsidy that you can qualify for having PW.
That's right. Yeah.
$200 a month.
Yeah, all of those things add up. So we really want you to learn about it as early as possible so you can maximize it. Tax credits, obviously, the disability tax credit, childcare benefit that lasts well beyond the person's a child for life. As long as the person has a disability, you could apply for the childcare benefit, which is an extra $3,000 a year. Attendant care, you could apply for attendant care credits, so up to 33% a month, which is like when you have your kids in daycare, you get 33% back as a tax credit. So all those little things. Exploring technology. I'm a lover of technology. I use Alexa often. I use the first then approach often, and we're developing something new through Cisco, which is a big technology company across the world, and they're developing something called an autonomous living app. And it's basically artificial intelligence with sensors. It is being tested in the Reno location, and I'm a partner with that to try to get this going. I've pulled kind of the team together to do that. And finally, network. I love that. You know, your partners are everybody, your family, your friends. Don't be shy to ask people to join in on teams. I know that for Rebecca, Team Rebecca was already well established in a very different way, but nobody had been formally asked. And like Cathy mentioned, she was nervous about asking, but wow, the number of people that showed up, you saw that on the first picture. And finally, before I kind of move it over to questions, I just want to talk about my 4 pillars of developing a sustainable housing model. So if you're not moving into a turnkey model, which is quite expensive, and you're developing your own model, I really do have people look at the 4 pillars of sustainability, which is have a planner or facilitator working with you to keep things on the go as a problem solver, resource, maybe knowledge person to give you the specialization and the knowledge about where you can go next. Microboards. So a microboard is basically a board of directors, an incorporated entity that surrounds only a single person. It's made up of 5 people. Microboards have been seen as very useful in supporting a person's managing, government funding and reducing liability when you're hiring staff, as well as it is just the next level of a network of support. So if you do have a network of support and you have 5 people on that network that want to be more involved in the administration of the needs of the person, and they love doing that piece of work, then you'd want to invite them to be a part of the microboard. And finally, partnering with a transfer payment agency, whoever that might be. I usually tell people to look at your own values and match those values with the agencies that you're looking at. It is a little bit like dating. You're going to talk to a lot of people, decide a lot of them aren't your style, and move on. But if you start early, you'll find a really great partner. And sometimes those partners will even help pull together other families who are like-minded with you and help you develop an actual concrete plan together.
Lots there, Kelly. And I know we're throwing a lot of people. I mean, I would just say, for me, doing the workshop was really helpful, and it was helpful to do it with other families. And if people are interested, we can try and organize a group of people. What we found in that workshop was we were from all over the province, different locations. I see. I know John is on here,
my uncle.
And but we had people of all ages. The intent wasn't like, let's all get together and create a Prader-Willi home for these 8 families. But I think we have found some relationships and some possible connections with one another. But I think it was really helpful. But DSO, I think if you're on mailing lists or get on the DSO mailing list, they run a DSO housing workshop every couple of months. The housing navigators from DSO are really great. I mean, they do their job really well in a complex time when, they don't have a lot of tools, but they're really good to get you started. And I think that, many of these connections are really great. And in fact, I know Lisa, I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot, you can say no. But I know Lisa Saul, you had done a planning workshop with another facilitator, and not with a group of people with Prader-Willi. And if you want to pop in and give some comments on the process you've been through. Hey, Tara.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I was kind of into this process when I received the email from Cathy to join this group. So I was a little bit torn when you've already paid for one thing to pay for something else. So
Mom?
Do you want me to talk?
Yes.
Okay. So it sounds very similar to the support that you folks had together. home was a piece of it, but it was a plan my future approach, and yet really focusing on connecting.
Lisa, I think you might be frozen. I'm going to turn off your video for you in the hopes that helps with your bandwidth.
Yeah.
So I've turned it off, so hopefully that will help. It's nice to see you though, and I wish we could still see you, but I think what you're saying is important. So if you want to just go back a minute or so and just get back into your piece, that would be great.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, maybe keep my video off because I was losing connection as well. So we're out here in the country and you never know. What I was saying was my group was very similar, hit a lot of the same really important issues of connecting with people, looking at Tara's capability, building on that. We're involved in this, like her, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So including her contribution, the things that she can do, we're you know, it's taken a little bit, but we're looking into employment supports and that whole area. Appointment tomorrow, right, Tara? So, and that would be with Goodwill in Sarnia. And it sounds like they have, you know, in my course that I've been taking, we were kind of educated about what you need to look for when you're looking into employment. And so this sounds promising, and I'll let you know how it goes. We then delved into home, and that was really cool to look at home as a feeling, not just a place. And also looked at the support and finance, but even today, Kelly, I learned more. So it is overwhelming how many things we miss.
You can live with me, Sadie.
Just the busy day-to-day. Yes.
And the dog.
And that's about how my program is going. And then I've signed on for, you know, support. We continue as a group, and it's kind of 3 times a month. Basically, there's some education. It's just awesome to stay connected, and they're all recorded, so you can catch up if you need to because life is busy. And yeah, it's kind of changing our direction and giving us a lot of hope. And without COVID, I don't know this would have happened because we wouldn't have had the time to stay and focus. And
yeah, I agree. And I think I also, you know, thought a lot of those things were in person, and, you know, it seemed like it was going to be impossible to do it not in person. And now we found, you know, that we're able to do it and really connect with a lot of different people. Although we've found, you know, Rebecca's made some really, really great relationships in our community at the dog park. And, you know, with friends that we wouldn't have done. Just friends that
just
we
friends
wouldn't
I
have
liked, and
made.
I liked, and I wanted to keep. And okay, so, oh, Kelly,
awesome.
Kelly, can you speak? Can you speak about can you talk about some of my friends I made then?
Well, I think you shared that a lot already, right? Your network of support and everybody that came, but you also are, like your mom was saying, at the dog park. I heard that loud and clear when we were planning together, how important that place was for you.
And in fact, you know, that experience, like, for example, in COVID has helped us, you know, think, and Rebecca said, you know, she wants to be near the dog park. She wants to be in her community. She, you know, many of the things that Rebecca has expressed have been things that really we've been able to kind of look around and see in a different way that we hadn't really kind of been thinking about, that would translate into, you know, what is the vision for her. So I think we have some time. Our goal really was to share some ideas and then kind of see if people had questions and have a bit of a dialogue. So I guess, Jen, I'm going to let you, I've got the slide up, but I guess if somebody wants to jump in, raise your hand, or just say hello and provide comments or questions. Pretty small.
Sure. Thanks, Cathy. And just so everyone knows, you can also change the view so that you can see each other, for those of you that are brave enough to turn on your videos. by going to the top right corner of your screen, there's a little button that will show view, and it has little icons. So you can change it to gallery view so that you can see everyone. I have been spotlighting people as we've been going through, but now that we're at more of the open communication portion, if you want to change your view, you can do so. So I see that Trina has her hand raised. So maybe I'll start with Trina if you want to unmute and ask your question or your comment.
Oh, hi. Yes, thank you. Just like to introduce myself. I'm Trina Fast. I have a daughter named Jenna, who's 25 years old, who has Prader-Willi. I'm not on camera for two reasons. One is the connection will go bad, and two, I look horrible today. So I wouldn't want our first meeting to be like this, but that's the life of working from home and raising a daughter or a child with developmental needs. I do have a quick question. I really appreciated hearing everyone's stories. And one thing that I've come to realize is that everyone is different. My daughter has is a little bit, she's nonverbal. So our needs are a little bit more in the sense for when it comes to housing. So I really appreciated hearing other people's sides, and it's very encouraging that people can live on their own or live with groups of people. Unfortunately, Jenna will never be able to benefit from something like that. It just wouldn't be safe for her. But I did appreciate this because I got all these ideas in my head, so it's great. But I did have a question for Kelly, because you mentioned something about COB, and it was talked about really quickly, and I didn't quite understand the concept of that and where that was coming from, and if it was. I'm in Ottawa, so I don't know if this is something just pertaining to Toronto area, or like I didn't know exactly what that means. You talked about subsidized, so is it subsidized housing, or so I just wonder if you could elaborate maybe, or just go a little slower on what that is. If you can explain that to me, that would be great.
Sure. So COB is called the Canada Ontario Housing Benefit. It's available to people across the province of Ontario. It actually comes from the goal of densifying housing. So the goal is to increase the number of people who have access to housing. The only way to get COB in every area of the province, including Ottawa, is to first put your name on the subsidized housing list in your region, and then let them know that you're looking for COB support. My recommendation for anybody who in all regions is to connect with your housing navigators. And we have that as one of the resource list options within the slide deck. Your area housing navigator, I believe it's Martha Beach in your area. She is a guru in terms of how to apply for and navigate the municipal housing sector. And so she will be able to assist you with that for sure. The other piece that I went through very quickly that I think that if I were a parent with a child with PWS, all families can use is direct funding through family managed home care. So it is through the home and community care program. Any person in the province of Ontario has access to it if people need support in any personal care needs. And since your loved ones need support in food, portion control, etc., they would be eligible for it. And so the benefit of that is that direct funding through the home and community care, because of the complex needs, could be given to you. Much like passports, you would get direct funding from the Ministry of Health. If you get 7 hours that you're eligible for per week, that's $13,000 a year. And that would allow you to build up the plan. So for example, hire a support staff, use 1 hour of it paid through Ministry of Health, and the other 2 hours paid through passports.
And if you're with 2 or 3 other people, or you're in a group setting and you're pooling those supports, I mean, I think that was one of the things from the workshop. Haven't quite figured out all the pieces to do it, but you know that there's different sources, you can kind of cobble them together. And I think that, you know, that really brings home, you know, I appreciate, Trina, what you're saying, because, you know, it's like that, like in my mind, it's almost like the actual physical space is the least of the issues. It's more about like building in all those supports and, you know, where you know, how do you actually put all that together, and how do all those pieces fit, and how do you pay for it? So I know, Kelly, we were developing a summary report after the workshop, but I think the average costs based on just those 8 individual plans in the workshops ranged from about $62,000 a year of support to what, $125,000, $150,000 a year of support. And that's not housing, room and board, day programs, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's really just about the support. So it's daunting. And you know, there's no magic to this. I mean, but I do think we have an opportunity. Like, so I guess I'm operating on a bunch of different levels. One is a very personal level, to find a place for Rebecca that is really a great place for Rebecca, but also, you know, for us as a community to do more advocacy. And we may in fact be able to have a stronger voice, you know, all together, to advocate for supports for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. I mean, years ago, Glenn Burrell advocated for that $200 to be added to the ODSP, and, you know, for Prader-Willi to be one of the reasons why you can qualify for $200 extra with ODSP. If people haven't done that, just email me after, and we can talk more about that. But those are examples where, you know, I think we have an opportunity to say we have a small community. You know, we don't know, we only know of about 250 families in Ontario. There's probably statistically about 800, but the needs are high. And I think in a time when the government is really struggling, they're good people. You know, you can, politics aside, this is a complicated problem, and it's an expensive problem. And so the government is having, you know, is challenged on how to do this and how to do this well. And I think in a transformative time, you know, we have an opportunity to come forward with some innovative and creative ideas as a community and as a voice that we might actually be able to get some funding that wouldn't have been available before. Ashley.
Hi, everybody. So I have a son that's 7 months old. The reason why I want to come on here today was to kind of have a plan for him in the future. One, he has Prader-Willi syndrome. However, he does have a second syndrome as well, which can lead to nonverbal. It can lead to other developmental issues as well. So I just kind of want to plan ahead to know what programs that are available for him. And I know that we are situated in the Quebec side, which Jennifer did tell us to whom we can contact to kind of get more input on grants and stuff. We have applied for a couple grants. Unfortunately, he doesn't qualify for a lot of things, even though he's on oxygen and being tube fed. So this is where I kind of want to touch base with everybody, kind of knowing like what programs are available in Ontario, because we are looking to move back to Ontario, just due to the issues that we're having with the grants and stuff here. And also for planning, like we want to make sure that we have a plan for him, and kind of knowing that with all of you who do have older children, that it's seeing a bright future, a whole like ahead of them, where they're all unique. However, there are some positive things that do look good. So I mean, it kind of gives me a positive vibe on where he could be, and kind of giving an understanding that from when we got the diagnosis that there was a lot of negativity regarding the actual diagnosis, and then hearing all the stories from each one of you guys, it's kind of encouraging to know that there are other help that we can kind of get, and also other support actual systems that we can talk to and get input, and knowing where we can go ahead, just because we do end up traveling a lot, and also my partner is also 10 years older than I am. So if something were to happen, then at least that we know that we're safe, and that we knowing that we have a plan for him, and knowing that financially, once he does end up being put into a home, either independently or not independently, at least it'll kind of put me at ease knowing that we have a plan. So this is where
Ashley, first of all, welcome to our community, and we're just delighted to have you. And congratulations on your little man.
Yeah.
And, I think you're doing, first of all, I know I'm speaking for everybody just to say welcome. And, you know, one of the things that I have certainly learned over the years, you know, the Prader-Willi community is like no other, and it's a really supportive community. So welcome. And we are just thrilled that, you know, you've connected with us. So I'd say, you know, you're doing all the right things. And, you know, I would say, love you. What's his name?
It's Zayden.
Zayden. Okay. Well, you know,
I think it's popular because yesterday we had another little Zayden, I think, yesterday.
Well, have fun with your baby is the first thing I would
Thank
say.
you.
And I think a plan is a really great thing. And I know Jennifer, you know, would be happy to help you, you know, link you to various things that you can do now that you can put into place, and some of the things to think about planning for the future. But I know, and I see many familiar friends and faces on this call, that, you know, it is a journey, and it's a different journey than the one you planned, but it's a really,
For sure. However, I'm very grateful because he's put a different perspective in life, and we do have a plan in life that we wanted, but knowing that what he has, that we kind of put that plan on hold, but yet it doesn't stop us from doing all that we wanted to do with him. So I'll kind of test us to kind of know where we're at in life, and knowing that, you know, I'm thankful because it took us 7 years to conceive. So, I mean, like, you know, you can't really, you can only have a dream, but you can only dream so far. So, I mean, like, this is where my dream came true, to have a child, and he's here with us today. So,
well,
and I think I have another
guy
question
to have you as his mom. And I can tell you
Thank
one thing about particularly moms, Prader-Willi moms are particularly fierce. So don't mess.
And I've learned to advocate. Like, I used to be a nurse myself, and I find that advocacy is a big thing for moms with children with special needs, but also moms that don't have children with needs as well. It's a big key. And I also have a question for Kelly. Like, I know that you were talking about different grants and stuff. However, when it comes to funding, I know that right now it doesn't apply to me because I'm on the Quebec side. But when it comes to funding, like, are you talking about those fundings that we can apply now and then being able to put it into a savings account, or is it funding that you'll get once they're in the homes?
So it's a little bit of both. So there is planning ahead, like the RDSP, which is going to be something that you would want to do with financial planning. And that is federal. So you can learn a lot about it on the Partners in Planning website that Jennifer is going to kind of put up as one of the resources anyway. Are you on the Quebec side of Gatineau, Ottawa? Quebec?
Yes, I am.
Yes. When people say the Quebec side, I automatically assume it's Gatineau. Yeah. So it's more about looking at the future, like you're doing right now, and trying to figure out where and what you could start putting in place right now to get ready for that future date when they're either in their home with their own, etc. But planning is also about things that you could access now. So if you were in Ontario, I would actually ask you to go to the home and community care program, and they would be able to give you a certain number of nursing hours and PSW hours because of his, you said G-tube fed, right? And oxygen?
He is. Yes, so he is. We do have somewhat of a support system now. However, because I am on mat leave right now, we don't have that. But once I am going back to that in place.
Yeah. And then the CLSC on the Quebec side is the main thing.
They are involved. Yeah.
Yeah. Very similar to our Lynn here. And the only other thing, the big difference between Quebec and Ontario is you guys have a great CHEO is right on the Ottawa side, which is a fabulous option for people. On the Quebec side, where you are, there is not such great ones. You have to go to Montreal, to the Montreal Children's.
Yeah, to this St. Josephine, yeah.
So I just cognizant of the time, I'm going to jump in, but Ashley, we're delighted that you're joining us, and so early in the game, and happy to help support you on the journey. I know, Jen, you said we could stay a couple of extra minutes. Do we still have a little time if people are?
Yeah, I think what would be good if you want to pull up the last couple of slides, we can do that as a group, and then for anyone that does need to sign off early, we completely understand that, but we can stay for another little while to respond to any other questions.
Yeah, I mean, I just put up a very, and this is like a limited, and even just as Kelly was talking, as people were talking, I had like a million more things I could put on. One of the things that I was thinking is maybe we could create something like a Google Doc or a place, if people are interested, where we can all just put ideas and, you know, and share things. But there are, you know, there are a lot of programs out there. I went on one last night. I mean, Partners for Planning, if you're not on their site, they are phenomenal. And, you know, at all stages of life, they run all kinds of things. I went on there was a program last night called, you know, My Home, My Life, My Community, that had from, you know, from very young to older families and people, you know, talking about kind of, you know, how to plan to really be involved in your community, and, you know, kind of not isolated and placed by others, but having a life that is a full life that is yours. And they have great programs all the time. And I often find I register for their programs, and when you can't make them, if you register for them, you get all the materials, and then you can actually see a recording of it later. So they have great resources as well. Connectability.
Sorry, Kathy, just to quickly interrupt. We're not seeing your slide at the moment.
Oh.
If you can try to reshare that.
It says I'm
for some reason.
sharing. Oh, that's weird. Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
That's weird. It said it was. Let's see.
I can always bring it up if it
You see
doesn't
it
work.
now?
I can't know.
Okay, Jen, do you want to put up
Sure.
I don't know why it says it's sharing and it shows that. So sorry.
No problem.
There we go. Okay, so the Partners for Planning, connectability, you know, they're really good. They have a ton of resources, and they also have a calendar on the front with all kinds of things that are coming up, and it's not just Toronto, so that's great. Housing, like I have to tell you, the people that are those housing navigators, every single DSO housing navigator, they're absolutely enthusiastic, and they really care about helping people. They, you know, they don't have a magic answer, but they really want to support people to think about planning. There's all kinds of other programs, something called Families for a Secure Future. They put on interesting stuff. Lights is a program that Community Living Toronto particularly has that matches up families and helps families connect with other families to create housing solutions. This shed workshop, this just came up because I was on some mailing list. It's University of Toronto is doing. It's about special housing and accommodating special and designing for housing to support challenging behaviors. So there happens to be a thing next Friday, and I got on. And if you get on, you know, there's lots of PW social media, from the OPWSA page, the Housing Task Force page. There's I should put it on here. There's a Prader-Willi Families Canada page, which is really great. The PWS USA, like, just if you just start Googling around or playing around on any of the social media that you're on, you know, everybody's, the more the merrier. And we do have, I think there's a thing in the chat. Let's see about families, list of families in their specific locations. Well, you know, I think that's a really good question. Is you know, that's what we try and do with OPWSA, is bring families together. So, you know, contact Jen. She can put you in touch with people in your area to the extent that she knows them. We try and do family gatherings around the province in different areas. I was thinking, I just put my personal email, or Jen, both of us, I'll put this for both of us before we send it out, if you want to send me your email and get on a mailing list, you know, I can create kind of a group list of people who are interested in talking to each other about you know, adult services and housing, and we can kind of do more, you know, as a kind of a little group together. If you have ideas for resources and other links or things happening in your community, you know, one of the great things that we learned in the workshop, the 8 families, everybody had different connections to different agencies and different service providers, and some were in rural areas, some were in very urban areas. You know, again, our kids are all quite different, but I think John Pingree, I don't know if John's still on, but John, I still love your infamous quote, which was that you're 10 years into your 5-year plan. But I think it is a journey, and we do it together, and the more we can link together, the better.
Cathy, just before we go to more questions, I just want to have a quick moment to talk about, we do have our Cheers to for Charity raffle going on right now to help raise funds for OPWSA. If anyone is interested in purchasing tickets or helping to sell tickets, you can always contact me about that. And then I also wanted to flag, I know Kelly mentioned the Ontario Autism program and funding available through that. We do have a session on Friday that Cindy Zapax is going to be presenting about understanding Prader-Willi syndrome and autism. So I would encourage you to register for that to find out more information about that, as it might be beneficial to seeing whether OAP is something that you could apply for. So I know that folks may have to sign off, but we will stay on a little bit longer to respond to some questions, and continue to raise your hand or put questions in the chat window. We'll monitor that. But I did want to bring forward a question that we received in advance. We received a couple of questions around whether there's any PWS specific group homes in Ontario. And yes, there are. There's three group homes. There's one in the Toronto area run by Vita. There's one in Orangeville run by Community Living Dufferin, I believe, and one in Ottawa. And but I will reiterate what Kelly had mentioned earlier about group home placements. Group home placements are few and far between. And Ontario isn't building new group homes. So at this point, a lot of families are looking at these alternative ways of looking at housing and residential options. So that's why this whole planning piece is very important. So I do want to stress that.
Jump in, the folks at Vita who have were one of the first group homes, and I think Kelly, you were involved in the setup of that home at Vita, ever so long ago. And it was actually a group of, OPWSA. One of the reasons OPWSA was created was a group of families, about 30 odd years ago that drove the development of that group home. But the folks from Vita who run it, they approached us, and we are talking to them because they've said, they're the funding for that, for having the ministry wants to move people out of that group home who can be appropriately accommodated in the community, leaving the group home spaces for very complex people who have very, very high needs that need, for example, medical support, psychological support, logistical support. And so Vita's super interested in working with us because, their role, and Kelly was alluding to this earlier, their role as an agency is changing from being, people who operate group homes to agencies that are supporting people out in the community. And many of them, like Kelly was just talking about, RENA with intentional communities are actually getting into the business of working with developers to develop buildings and have some portion of those buildings be funded spots where people get, placed and supported by the agency. And then a combination of that and people who may have fee-for-service places in those buildings and being supported in those intentional communities. So, I think, and it's a big conversation. It's probably a whole, that I would say that requires a glass of wine and more time is, does it need to be PW specific or not? And I think there are, a range of opinions on that. We've talked to the folks in the States about, their experience and do people need to be in PWS specific environments or not? And they said, well, absolutely, because all the problems happen when they're not in PW specific environments. But if you really start to unpack that a little bit more, it may be, a lack of training, not, the good environmental supports aren't in place, the preparation's not in place, the plan's not in place. So people who aren't in PWS specific environments aren't successful. So it's hard to tell, all to say, I think the world is moving more and more from those kind of specific environments to more inclusive or broader range of supports.
And to add to that, I mentioned that there's 3 PWS specific group homes. Each of those probably has 5 to 6 individuals with PWS, but we know of a number of individuals with PWS that are in more mixed sort of settings and, thriving and doing well. So it's not to say, at least in our experience, that the PWS specific group homes are the only option. And certainly what we're doing here today is to explore the other options that are available.
Yeah, I mean, in the States, there's places like Latham centers on Cape Cod that Rebecca, you and I went to visit, and people out in Wisconsin, the Prader-Willi homes of, what's it,
Oconomowoc.
Oconomowoc, that are whole communities where there's like a couple of hundred people with Prader-Willi that live in a variety of settings, from group homes to shared community homes to their own apartments. And so, I mean, I think that, there's no shortage of models. I think the issue is how to navigate and figure out the one that works for you.
So I'm not seeing any other hands raised or questions in the chat. But I will ask a question that came through in advance. One of the questions was around, the need for support and how tricky it can be in a housing situation. And this parent expressed a concern about ongoing support, that their son can continue to live independently. And I'm sure that applies to when they're here, but also when the parents are no longer here. How can they ensure that that support is ongoing?
So I think I'll answer that with the 4 pillars. It really is important to have a really good facilitator, a great network of support, those people that will problem solve issues as they come up when you're no longer around. And the biggest piece is a partner. So you would want to find your partner agency sooner than later, who may even hire your own supports. I know that some agencies, such as Montage, will hire your existing supports as staff in order to make it really easy, and they become the employer of record for you. So talk to your partners, speak within your team, and I'm sure there'll be a good solution to keep it sustainable.
I can say, and I don't know if John, you want to pop in, from the workshop, but I think a lot of families in the workshop, and ours was one of them, really liked the idea of partnering with an agency to provide supports and as part of a community, and to provide those supports, just like an envelope of support around us that would be sustainable longer term than just us, or Rebecca's sister Natalie, who's very supportive. But I know Patricia, watching you over the years, I mean, you put a huge amount of effort into that, and that's a big learning.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, agencies are important. Your circle is important. So the support comes from many sources, but agencies, certainly is one of them. I mean, if you can, find an agency in your area and develop a good rapport relationship with them, then that's great. You're a step ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, John and Cathy. Any other questions from the group? I've been scrolling through the questions that we received in advance, and I think we've covered a number of those in the presentation portion.
I guess the other thing I would say is, I know there's some people on this call who have been looking for other families, like-minded families to do projects with. So if that's something that interests you, I would say if you want to email me or Jen, and we can try and kind of connect you to other people who may be doing that.
I have one question. Under the 4 pillars of sustainability housing model, working with a transfer agency. Sorry, I just wondered, what is a transfer agency? Is that like community living?
Yeah, so it's a transfer payment agency. Technically, is any agency in your area that is funded by MCCSS. So in other words, receives funding directly from MCCSS. You'll get a list of transfer payment agencies. If you go on your DSO website, they'll give you the list of transfer payment agencies in your area.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify that, Kelly, for folks that are not as familiar with that, the transfer payment agency is just to help to funnel the funding that you receive.
Yeah, so if people ever receive individualized funding, yes, but they could also be to be a partner to purchase fee for service from. So a lot of the times, for example, people want staffing models that exist. And in Toronto, Meta is an agency that I go to often who provides staff support, coordinated staffing response, basically. So they hire Meta to give them 20 hours a week. If the person calls in sick, they call Meta. Meta sends them and they get invoiced once a month from Meta. So it doesn't have to be an agency that because you're receiving money, you could also pay fee for service.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Any other last questions? Cathy, you're muted. I'm not sure.
I was just seeing that Kelly just sent me an email about that Partners for Planning is putting on a series of workshops of just exactly about this journey to belonging, and the ministry will be presenting on it. So go to the Partners for Planning website. We'll send the slides out and it has a link to it, but you can also just Google Partners for Planning, and they do great programs, really worth checking out. And that may be a really good next step for people.
Yeah, the interesting thing is policy leads rarely speak unless there's something coming. So that's why I sent it to you.
Yeah. I
love that when they send out a policy lead to speak. It's a good news.
Well, I would say, with an election coming up, they're going to want to, this is how governments work. And this one in particular, they're going to want things to announce and things to talk about, to appeal. So, I think creative ideas or advocacy, that this is a good time to kind of get in the game.
Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing that, Kelly. And as Cathy said, we will be sending out the slide deck with the links to everything. So make sure you check that out. Seeing that there aren't any other questions coming through, I guess we will close things off. So I would like to thank Kelly Casey for joining us and sharing your expertise. It's always great to hear about these various little pockets of money and information that you're so knowledgeable about. So thank you so much for sharing that. Patricia Parker, always a pleasure to hear about what you've set up with Victoria and how that's working and how it's always evolving over time as Victoria ages and as you guys become more knowledgeable. So thank you for sharing that. And Cathy, you did a fantastic job of steering this ship. So thank you again for taking this on and for bringing everyone together and walking us through this presentation. And
I had Rebecca helping me, so that's really the best part, right?
And thank you to all the participants for joining us and being here to learn alongside us. And please feel free to reach out at any point, and we'll do our best to support you along your journeys. So thank you for your participation, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you.